Okay, today's presentation is on the ethnic Germans in Romania, specifically the years around 1939 to 1989, 50 years in the middle of the 20th century, which is a time of great change and chaos for all of the Germans in the East, in this case, the Balkans, but specifically the areas of the Eastern Banat and Transylvania. So the population, particularly in Transylvania, of Siebenbürger is quite old, goes back to the 12th century. The German population in the Banat, both in the Romanian side and in the Serbian or Yugoslav side in the west, much more recent, about 1718 under Maria Theresa and the Habsburgs. But certainly these communities had been there 4 centuries before the events of the aftermath of the Second World War and the imposition of communism and the mass emigration out of Romania into Germany following the end officially of communism in Romania after Ceausescu's execution. But this had been a process that had been going on for some time throughout the 1940s and 60s and 70s, and particularly 1980s and 1990s. So I'll try and chronologize the history from the modern times, particularly after the first modern census of 1930. So most of the ethnic Germans in what will become the new Romanian state, as far as the territory in 1919, were new acquisitions for the government in Bucharest. The territory that they had after the Second Balkan War only had about 30,000 or so ethnic Germans. Most of the Germans they acquired lived either in the Eastern Banat, settlers under the Austrian Habsburgs, Maria Theresa, starting this process of the settlement of the Banat by the Donau Schwaben. And of course, much earlier, under the Hungarians, again starting in the 12th century, migration from Western and Central Germany. Of course, these aren't unified states at this time, into Transylvania or Siebenbürger. So in the 12th century, we start to see settlement of Germans into Transylvania, and they get an official status in 1224. So their position there as an established ethnic community is quite old, undoubtedly the oldest German community outside of Germany with such a status and roots. But it's very small now. Total number of ethnic Germans in all of Romania, both Transylvania, the Banat, and other regions, is only around 35,000 as of the last census, which was 11 years ago in 2011. So in 1930, the German population is quite large in Romania, over 745,000, or 4.1% of the population. This is before they retake Bessarabia from the Soviet Union, which has about 80,000 thousand ethnic Germans in it as well. So in 1930, the Banat is the largest German population in Romania, a little over 275,000, and there are about 237,000 in Transylvania. And the population for all Germans in Romania will be higher in 1939 census, about 782,000. So this is the height of the population, and it will decrease primarily through emigration, evacuations, flight, other forms of movement out of Romania by the ethnic Germans, mostly into Germany. In 1935, the German minority, which had been politically up until this time in independent Romania fairly quiet, demands autonomy. And in about 5 years from that, in 1940, they receive it under the auspices of the National Socialists and are put under the direct protection of the government in Berlin. So in 1940, you also have first evacuations out of Romania, particularly out of Bessarabia, because it will come under Soviet rule as a result of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Well, these people are evacuated into the Wartime. There's also some other emigration out of Romania at this time. A part of Transylvania in the north, as well as Bukovina, are also lost to the Romanian. Transylvania in the north going to the Hungarians. All right. So during the war, about 75,000 Germans in Romania fight for the German military, 60,000 in the Waffen-SS, including in the Prince Eugen Waffen-SS division, which is formed primarily out of Germans from the Western Banat in German-occupied Serbia, and about 15,000 Germans from Romania in the Wehrmacht and the Todt organization, named after Fritz Todt, that does the military fortifications in Germany for construction, including the Autobahn. In April 1943, all of these men are granted German citizenship by a decree of Adolf Hitler because they are serving in the Waffen-SS and to a lesser extent serving in the Wehrmacht. This is after the Romanian army is completely devastated at Stalingrad, and you have the beginning of the advance of the Soviet Union against the Axis, Germany, Hungary, Romania. And you will eventually, in 23rd of August 1944, Romania will have a coup and switch sides to support the Allies against the Axis. And at this time, some 100,000 ethnic Germans are evacuated by the German military out of Romania into Germany and German-occupied parts of Poland. So this decreases the German population from about 550,000, what it was after the evacuations from Bessarabia, the award of northern Transylvania to Hungary, and other reductions. So now the German population of Romania is about 450,000. At the end of the Second World War, after this evacuation in 1944. So this is a rather significant reduction from the 800,000 or so that were in Romania in 1939. A little less than 400,000, but 800,000, I'm sorry. A little less than 800,000 then, and then the fall of 1944, the population is down to about 450,000. So not quite half, but close to it. And it will be further reduced after the Second World War, with what kind of the focus here of this talk on the Germans and Romania, and that is the losses due to the export or deportation for forced labor of some 70,000 ethnic Germans, mostly from the Banat and Transylvania, to the Soviet Union, mostly coal mines in the Donbass in eastern Ukraine and iron mines in south of Ukraine, also some sent to the Urals. They are sent as part of the Soviet idea of reparation through labor. About 120,000 ethnic Germans from Romania, Hungary, Yugoslavia are sent to Group V camps, which stands for Main Administration of Prisoner of War and Civilian Internees. So these are the civilian internees, separate from prisoners of war. Although part of the civilian internees include 2,000 ethnic Germans that had been in the Romanian rather than German military and are demobilized and then as soldiers and remobilized as forced laborers and sent to the Soviet Union. So almost 70,000, a little less, ethnic Germans from Romania are sent to Group V camps between 11th of January 1945 and 2nd of February 1945. This is when the roundup is done by the Soviet NKVD with support of local Romanian police. And this makes it different from what happens in Hungary, where there are no Hungarian forces involved in the roundup of some 30,000, a little bit more, ethnic Germans to be sent to Group V camp. Although in Hungary, there is a Romanian military unit that supports the Soviets in this task. So Romanians having switched sides contribute to this roundup of what the Soviets are calling reparations through labor, but basically mobilization of ethnic German civilians for forced labor in Romania, Hungary, Yugoslavia, also not included in the numbers I've given, a number from Silesia and East Prussia, which were part of Germany proper. So about 11,000 NKVD forces involved in this roundup and deportation to the USSR of able-bodied German men ages 17 to 45 and able-bodied German women ages 18 to 30. So you can see there's a much greater age range for the men, 15 years, than for women. And the vast majority of these people being sent are, in fact, because they want labor out of them, able-bodied young men. There's far fewer women being sent, although there are quite a few. Um, and this is similar to what happened in the Soviet Union itself with the mobilization for ethnic Germans deported eastward, as well as locals living in Siberia and Kazakhstan, local Germans, that is, mobilized for the labor army. So there, over 2/3 of the mobilized Germans were men rather than women. So the Group V camps will still have some prisoners, including civilians that are mobilized and not tried and not sentenced for anything, since they are being used solely as a forced labor contingent and not receiving any type of judicial process from the Soviets or the Romanians in their roundup and deportation and confinement in forced labor camps. Most will be released by 1949. That is, civilian ethnic Germans from Romania. So the largest release is actually in 1949. Some 34% of the Germans from Romania are repatriated either to Germany, particularly the SBZ before the DDR is formed, or the DDR after it is formed. So of the original 70,000 ethnic Germans from Romania sent to the USSR to work in coal mines in the Donbass, iron mines in southern Ukraine, some working in the Group V camps located in the Urals. About 50,000 do not ever return to Romania. And of those 50,000, at least 10,000 die, either in transport to the Soviet Union on overcrowded and unhygienic cattle cars, or die in the camps from malnutrition, infectious diseases due to unhygienic conditions, and exhaustion due to inhumane work long periods of time. It's hard to get a grasp on all the figures. Generally, the recorded figures are too low because they leave out people, and generally people making estimates based on demographics are too high. Marcus Wiens suggests about 10,000 dying, or 15%. Soviet recorded numbers of civilians in Group V camps from Hungary, Romania, and Yugoslavia, however, are higher, about 19 to 20%. So I would say probably the number is probably at least 15,000, around 20% dying. But again, we can never get real good grasp on these numbers, even when we have them in the documents down to the last man, because we don't know if there are people missing, and sometimes there's whole categories missing. We don't know if they've recorded deaths in other categories, such as escapes or releases. We generally, for the Soviet case, don't have any records on people who are released and then die shortly after their release due to damage done to their health in the camps. There's all this. There's also sometimes double counting, same people being counted more than once due to inaction, and also just bad counting. All right, so. But nonetheless, I think we can note that the number that died is in only 1945 to 1949, in only a period of 4 years, is in the thousands, probably at least 10,000 out of the 70,000. but I would say it's probably even higher, probably somewhere around 15,000 out of the 70,000. But it's not something we can resolve today. All right, but the cause of death, again, malnutrition, typhus due to infestations of lice which spread typhus, uh, work accidents, and other such causes, similar to what we see in Gulag camps, similar to what we see with the labor army, with the Russian Germans, similar to what we see with German and Romanian and Hungarian prisoners of war, as well as Italian prisoners of war in Group V camps as well at this time in the 1940s, where we have the highest recorded death rates for Soviet forced labor in the history of the USSR, even higher than in the 1930s, where they reached quite high levels both in 1930 and 1933, but also in 1937 and 1938. But the figures, particularly for the years 1942 and 1943, are actually much, much higher. All right. Now, the Group V camps for civilian internees, of course, we don't get figures until the 1945 when they arrive, but certainly very high figures in 1947, which is where we have another famine in the Soviet Union. So after this occurs, so this doesn't affect most of the Germans remaining in Romania. Obviously, 70,000 out of 450,000. But it does reduce the population further. Some 50,000 never return. So only about 20,000 go back to Romania. This is why in the literature, even though there's not the mass forced expulsion, like from Eastern Germany, East Prussia, Pomerania, Silesia, and other areas annexed to Poland, and in the case of northeastern East Prussia, to the Soviet Union, or from the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, or from Hungary, we do see Romanian Germans classified as expellees as well as refugees and evacuees. And this is those ethnic Germans that had been sent to Group V camps in the Soviet Union and then repatriated to East Germany rather than being allowed to return to Romania. So we have around 40,000 or so ethnic Germans who are released from Group V camps in the Soviet Union, sent to what becomes the DDR, or after 49, the DDR itself, rather than to Romania, ultimately. So by 1948, the ethnic German population in Romania is down to about 344,000. A huge decrease from the 786,000 in 1939, less than 10 years before. So 9 years, they're losing about half of their population, mostly by people being evacuated or fleeing into Germany, or one of the two what will become German occupation. West Germany is technically 3 occupation zones that becomes 2 occupation zones that become 1 occupation zone, but either into what will become the BRD in the west or what will become the DDR in the east. Even though the DDR is actually not in the east, it's in the center because Eastern Germany is annexed mostly to Poland and partially to the USSR. So, but we use the state names, the DDR and the BRD, Most of that is where most of the missing population goes. They are not killed, although many do die in group B camps. So we don't know exactly how many, but I'm going to put out my estimate of 15,000. And so the next thing that happens in Romania for the ethnic Germans is there is a internal deportation from the Banat. This is the eastern Banat and the western Banat. In Yugoslavia, most of those people have already been removed by the Yugoslav communists through a process of being interned first in forced labor camps, and then doing forced labor in factories, and then emigrating into Austria or Germany. But in the Eastern Banat in Romania, about 40,000 ethnic Germans in 1951, 1952 are deported into northeastern Romania into the Barahan Desert, where they first live in dugouts and then later wooden huts. But they are not allowed to return to the Banat within Romania until 1956. And this is the last example of massive repression of the group. So until this time, after this time, there is no more forced movement of Germans by the Romanian communist government. So we have 70,000 sent to the Soviet Union in 1945, and then we have 40,000 internally displaced in 1951 and 1952. The Germans in Romania, unlike the Soviet Union, do have guaranteed minority rights, especially with regard to German language institutions, particularly education and media. Dominic Holman, the famous Russian-German dissident in Siberia, notes in his letters to the Soviet government that the German population in Romania has cultural rights that the German population of the Soviet Union does not. There is an agreement between the government of the BRD, the Federal Republic of Germany, and out of Bonn and Romania on family reunification in 1957. And unlike the similar agreement between the BRD and the Soviet Union at this time, there is, during the 1960s and 1970s, continued emigration under this agreement from Romania to West Germany, whereas in the Soviet Union, there's a brief burst of emigration out of the Soviet Union in the late 1950s into West Germany, but it is cut off in the 1960s and does not revive until after the formation of a German emigration movement in 1973. So during the decade of the 1960s, there is steady, although not huge, migration of Romanian Germans to West Germany, but none from the USSR. Okay. So this migration will greatly increase in the late 70s and 1980s under Nicole Ceausescu, because he is trying to pay off all of the debt to foreign banks and governments owed by Romania. He imposes this forced austerity to force the funds and capital out of the population. But one of the sources of money is basically to sell the German minority to West Germany and also sell Jews to Israel for cash payments. And so between 1977 and 1992, there is a huge decrease in the German population in Romania due to emigration. It goes down from 359,000 to 119,000, of which about 100,000 are people who leave after 1989 with the execution of Nicolae Ceausescu. And there will be continued emigration. By 2011, the last census, the German population down to a little over 36,000. So, we see in total between 1957 and 1990, about 300,000 ethnic Germans leave Romania. So in 1956, there were 384,000 Germans, almost 385,000, according to the census, living in Romania. So they lose over 75% of their population during this time due to emigration. And now, of course, it'd be interesting to see. There's supposed to be a census for Romania this year. I'm thinking that the population is considerably lower than the 36,000 in 2011 due to continued emigration. Marcus Wiens, a while ago, so his figure is probably inaccurate as well, put it at 10,000 left. So it may be like Kyrgyzstan, where the population, is down now to under 10,000 ethnic Germans in all of Romania, the Banat, as well as Siebenbürgen and other parts of Romania. The population has up and left to take advantage of the right of return for Germans oppressed in communist countries. And in Romania, this would have been both the 1945 to 1949's internment and forced labor in GUPV camps in the USSR, as well as the 1951 to 1956 internal exile from the Banat to northeastern Romania, as well as, I guess, general oppression under communist rule in Romania, although not specifically due to their German ethnicity or nationality. As I said, culturally, they had considerably more rights than the ethnic Germans in the USSR during the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. So this is, I think, going to be a short video. So conclusion. All right. So the German population of Romania, quite old, going all the way back to the 1240s. A settlement by invitation of Hungarian kings in Transylvania, which remains for most of its history under Hungarian rule, only become under Romanian rule after World War I. And then again, part of it goes back to Hungary during the war, but after World War II, all of it is again under Romanian rule, including the German and also Hungarian minorities within the territory. But not nearly as old, but still 1718, considerably older than the German population in the Russian Empire proper, which the first settlement is in 1764. almost a half a century later. And today, it's basically disappeared through mass emigration, which, as I said, it starts in 1940. There's a big wave, particularly out of Bessarabia, which goes back under Soviet rule after World War II. There was a big wave in 1944, about 100,000 Germans leaving Romania after they switched to the Allied side and start fighting with the Soviets against the Hungarians. And of course, there is steady migration from 1957 to 1990, but increasing dramatically first in the 1980s and then again in the early 1990s. Right, so between 1977 and 1992, almost 200,000 ethnic Germans leave Romania for West Germany, which will be unified during that time. But the unlike the emigration out of the Soviet Union, very few Romanian Germans opt to settle in the DDR. There are some Russian Germans that do settle in the DDR. They're a small minority compared to those who go to the BRD. Likewise with other German communities in the communist countries in Central and Eastern Europe that are not part of the Soviet Union. All right, so basically the population is, as I said, disintegrated as far as its connection to the territories of Siebenbürgen and the Banat. They've all got up and emigrated or returned, as it were, as Aussiedler and Spätaussiedler to the BRD. And it's quite possible with the most recent census this year that we'll find that the population of ethnic Germans remaining in Romania is very, very small. But 2011 census, the official number, 36,042. And that's down from a height in 1939 of 782,246. So 95% or so of the population declined from 1939 to 2011, but already by 1989, most of this population had left. 92 census, 119,462 Germans left. So, like the Germans in the former Soviet Union, basically has largely been reduced to a much smaller population through emigration. Although in this case, it's much more extreme because there's still about 400,000 Germans in Siberia and 200,000 in Kazakhstan. All right, so I will end this at about 40 minutes, so that's relatively short, although most of my videos now about an hour. All right, so hopefully, even though this is kind of rough, and I know it got a little bit repetitive at the end, you have to excuse that. This isn't going, to get more than a couple hundred views anyways. So I will leave it at that, and I will see you all later. Auf Wiedersehen.